Alright, so working with type in Photoshop and Illustrator and any Adobe program tends to be pretty similar. When you're working with type, first of all, I have this as not a pure white background because generally you don't want to use pure white or pure black, it's just too harsh. But when you're working with type, there are going to be other type tools. So horizontal type is what you're usually going to work with, and vertical type is just up and down, which is rarely ever used. And then horizontal type mask tool is where you want to have a picture as your typography, and I'll show you that at the end of this video. So with the horizontal type tool, just so you know, when you're working with a lot of type, make sure that you're paying attention to the options bar because this is going to change your alignment, the font color, the size. These are your basic settings. But if you want a little bit more control, if you're reading chapter 3 and it's talking about leading and kerning and all that good stuff, then you need to make sure you have the character panel open. And if you're going to use a lot of type, like using paragraphs, then you need to make sure you have the paragraph panel open, because that's going to allow you to change the alignment, the spacing after a paragraph, if you hyphenate it, etc. So when we come in here, there's a couple of things. First of all, you can look through the type list to choose what kind of type you want, but if you're like me, these samples are just a little bit too small. So I usually go up to type, font preview size, and do extra large. And then when I choose type, it's much easier to see between all of these. Now, let's say I'm not sure what kind of font I want. So I'll choose Cafe Nero. And I go ahead and type my heading. And that's a bit big. And I could either highlight it here and make it small and then drag it over. But it's just going to be kind of really big. But let's say I don't like Cafe Nero. I could come here and I could keep clicking on each one of these, or if I click inside of it and then just start moving my arrow down, it's going to go through the list of all the different typography I have, so I could choose any of them that I like. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this to Helvetica. If you're on a Mac, you have Helvetica. If you're not, that's lame, so you can't have it. But let me go ahead and make this bigger. As you can see, when you hover over the font size over here, you can scroll it and it's going to make it bigger as you scroll it. So there's my heading. Now, generally, when you're working with fonts that are headings, there are two rules. First of all, when you type a heading font, you don't click and drag to make a square as big as the page. You simply click, and this is called point type. And then this is going to make one line for that text, and that's what we want for this heading. So let me go ahead and throw this away because we don't actually want that, but that's what I did for this heading. If I was going to do a paragraph and I maybe only wanted the paragraph to be right here in a column, then I could, and I can go ahead and shut that off just so I can see this. Then I can drag out a square like that, and now it's going to just have the text be in this square, so it's not going to go over here. So I can make it much smaller, and then I can paste in my paragraph text, and there's my paragraph. So let's say I want it to break at this point, and there we go. So then that allows it to have a defined boundary, which is something you don't want to see with a heading. Now, when you've done something like paragraph font, all the spacing or the leading, the space between, not the leading, the kerning, the space between letters, it's fine when it's at this size, but when your font gets much bigger, as in this heading, you'll see some gaps that look bigger than other gaps. So right here, this gap between the H and the E and the E and the A doesn't look as tight as these gaps in right here. So I can click inside of here and I can start messing over here, and I can, this is the tracking, so it's going to adjust. Actually, the tracking will adjust the spacing for your entire heading. And then if you click in between a certain point, and I'm going to go ahead and change that back to what it was, 0. So if I click inside of here, we can change the kerning over here. And if you want to, you can change it, you can squeeze it in this way. But I tend to use, if I do hold Alt and then use my arrow key, that allows me to fine tune it the way I want it, so I can adjust that spacing and just make it tighter. Oops. And you're probably thinking, why don't I just use tracking for this? Well, that's because tracking is going to adjust all the spacing between the letters, and I might want to do 2 and then 1 here and then none here. So you should be doing this for every heading that you create, because fonts are usually meant, like Helvetica is meant to be at this size. So when you make it bigger, you have to adjust the spacing so it looks even and good together. So a lot of people will ask me, how do you know what text to pair? Just so you know, you're never going to go wrong by staying in the same family. So if I look here, I have 3 Helveticas. We have Helvetica, Helvetica CY, and Helvetica Neue. If I come here, there's also all these different styles. So I can choose light for my heading. I can choose bold and oblique for my heading. And it's always going to look good with another version of Helvetica. So even if I choose Helvetica Neue, and even if I did ultra light, that's still going to look good together because they're still part of the same family. Now, if you were going to do something like Helvetica Neue, and let's just go ahead and choose light. Usually if you're using a sans serif font, which means it doesn't have any serifs, any decoration on the end, then it's a good plan to make your body text a serif font. So I can come here for my paragraph, and I can choose a serif font for this. And it's going to take a while for you to understand which fonts are serifs. So as we're coming here, all of these, this one, it looks like a serif, but it just has it on the L, so it's not. This one is still a sans serif. So things like that you're used to, like Times New Roman, which I don't hardly ever use, but Times New Roman, if we look at this is a serif because it has little tiny flourishes on the end of each of its letters. So then those two look really good together because they are different styles, but they're still pretty easy to see. Now, with headings, these are where you want to use kind of those fonts that are meant for headings. So Impact is meant for a heading. And see, I have to probably adjust the spacing here again. But if I were to change this to Impact, I go all the way up here, that doesn't look good because it's really hard to read when it has a lot in it. So make sure that you're choosing your fonts based on readability and what it looks like, and make sure that your fonts that are kind of more special, so to speak, you use them in very small amounts. They're going to go a long way just being in a large heading. So as you're over here, you can hover over what each of these does. These full bold and full italic, don't use those because you should be using these styles up here. So Impact is already bold and it's meant to be bold. But as you saw with Helvetica, I had options here for bold. Use that one because that's the designed Helvetica bold, and it's going to look much better than faux bold. But this will change it to all caps. This will change it to small caps if you need it to. So if I did small caps, that's what it looked like. And then you can change it to superscript or subscript, underline, and strike through. These are if you're using open type font. So anything that has an O is open type font. So if I went to Lithos Pro, all of a sudden these become options because there's stylistic alternates and ordinals and how to make, fractions. So that's a basic introduction into font. If you want to, you can change the font color, and it's just as easy as that. And basically, if I was making a heading that I wanted to emphasize certain words on, I would make them all their own separate word so that I can easily move them around and change their size without messing with the other fonts in, let's say, a movie quote. So as we go through this, I did want to show you how to, real quick, do the masked font. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Impact or a chunky font. And it doesn't really matter, black, white, whatever. So if I go ahead and choose this and I type here steel, and I'm going to make it much bigger. There we go. And then all I have to do is hit the mask, and then it's going to create a word with a picture behind it for steel. So anyway, I hope that helps you or introduces you into typography in Photoshop. Make sure when you're making a heading that you just click, and when you're making a paragraph that you click and drag the boundary area.